All right, so this video is going to be filling out the other side of perceiving, the intuitive cognitive functions. If you remember from the first video in this module, intuition is the advanced pattern recognition that our minds do that allow us to imagine possibilities and predict how things are going to go. So let's start with extroverted intuition, or NE. In a nutshell, extroverted intuition is the function behind random ideation. It's constantly asking, what if this? Oh, but wait, what if this? Oh, and it's using these type of questions to constantly build out a map of connections between concepts. It also entices novelty seeking, where the intention is to experience something it hasn't experienced before in an endless exploration of all possible outcomes. It just wants to explore all possibilities from an innate curiosity to just see what might happen. Extroverted intuition also isn't particularly careful with the possibilities that it intuits. It just kind of throws everything at the wall and sees what sticks. A very NE-oriented thought process might be something like, what would happen if I just stopped walking in the middle of the crosswalk and then just stared up at the sky? Or what would happen if I pretended to forget how to speak English in the middle of a sentence while talking to somebody new? Those may sound like really silly ideas, even kind of dumb, but that's the thing. Extroverted intuition doesn't really judge the value of the ideas it posits. It just kind of pukes out random. This type of thought process lends itself very well to creative problem solving. This is because it asks enough questions such that it can achieve a high-level understanding of many different fields of knowledge, and then it can borrow concepts from one to solve problems in another. NE, though, never really tires of seeking novelty, and so any of the interest that it imparts on any particular topic or project is going to be somewhat short-lived, and you're probably just going to get bored and then end up wanting to search for something else to go and put your efforts into. Extroverted intuition differs from extroverted sensing in that NE wants to seek out novelty simply due to innate intellectual curiosity. So it might impose unfamiliar or weird situations literally just to see what happens. It's just, I'm curious, what's going to happen? SE, on the other hand, is more interested in heightening the sensation of an experience. That can sometimes lead to them, though, encouraging similar behaviors, like, for example, desperately wanting to travel the world. NE does this because it wants to be exposed to newness. It wants to go and see how people act and think in different cultures that can broaden its intuitive understanding of humans. SE, on the other hand, might be more interested in the literal sensory experience of travel, experiencing the food, the culture, music, dance, seeing people, seeing sights, all that kind of stuff. Bringing all of this together, people who use extroverted intuition as a strength tend to be very open-minded problem solvers who love engaging in new, novel activities that are very interesting and exciting for them. They then also tend to get bored pretty easily once the novelty wears off, and then they go get excited about the next shiny idea. They might start a new business venture on a fun idea, or just get deeply invested in learning a new technical skill. Then they'll get bored, try something else. People whose minds don't value extroverted intuition as highly probably tend to think that that sounds pretty reckless, and instead they might seek either stability or at least be a little bit less haphazard with their intuitive leaps. Okay, next we have introverted intuition, or NI. This is probably one of the hardest functions to understand if you aren't naturally wired to use this as a strength. And honestly, maybe even if you are. So don't worry if this next part is a little bit hard to understand fully. At a high level, NI is a post-processing function similar to SI in that it creates an internal representation of data only after you've experienced something. However, SI is accumulating sensory information and experiences and building out an internal map of comfort and familiarity. NI, on the other hand, accumulates conceptual relationships between ideas and things and builds out a map of prediction. Okay, let's unpack what that means. NI wouldn't look at and remember the relationship between, say, Jill and Bob, like SI might. Jill and Bob's relationship being a concrete thing you can point at, that was something that existed. Instead, it might look more at human relationships at a conceptual level. It might ask something akin to, what do human relationships even mean? Or maybe, what is the purpose of human relationships? It might extract all of the patterns of how human relationships impact every other aspect of life. Over time, this process allows NI to build out an internal intuitive model of how reality works. It sees patterns between how different concepts interact with each other. It also begins to see patterns in how it looks at patterns, and so almost begins to learn how it learns, going through all of the patterns of how the human mind works. It contrasts that against how other people seem to learn things and how they solve their problems, and it creates an internal catalog of different human thought patterns. This allows NI users to imagine what it would be like to see something from somebody else's perspective based on other patterns they see that person display. NI users can often find themselves asking things like, what would Bill do in this situation? And then they will literally use their NI to predict what Bill would do in that situation. It's almost as if they see it. Interestingly, this predictive ability also gives NI users an uncanny ability to have hunches as to how things are likely to play out. That's because one of the patterns it recognizes is how time affects things. And so it can imagine time moving forward and then just seeing how all the other patterns play out. An inaccurate but simple way to say this is that NI users look like they can see into the future. They can't, of course, but their brains are constantly trying to predict what is likely to occur. And they can get eerily accurate with those predictions after a lifetime of practice. People who use NI as a strength tend to put themselves on long-term goal-oriented paths. When you're constantly predicting the future, you can't help but see your own future and then feel emboldened to create that future for yourself. As such, they're often ambitious and driven, and if they're not, they often live in the agony of unrealized goals. They also tend to come to their visions of the future without actively trying to. It just sort of happens to them as they let their mind wander and explore different possibilities in the background. Sometimes they also make eerily accurate predictions about the future, but then have a very hard time trying to explain how it is they could possibly know what they know. People who don't use this function as a strength can sometimes feel weird about that. They might feel like there's no possible way that that NI user could possibly know what they profess to know is going to happen. People whose minds don't use NI can have a few different relationships with it. Some simply just dislike the process of thinking about long-term possibilities or the meanings behind the actions they take because they feel it diminishes the experience of the here and now. Others, particularly those who use extroverted intuition as a strength, tend to think that if you're guarded with your intuition, then you're going to get less feedback on it, and then it sort of boxes in your thinking. Others still simply dislike looking into the future because they don't trust their ability to predict it well. So it's a waste of time. Okay, so here's a bit of extra perspective on the two types of intuition. You can almost think of extroverted intuition as like a shotgun blast of what-if ideas that aren't particularly accurate and just spray everywhere. NI, on the other hand, is like a sniper rifle, where it takes longer to set up the shot, but it looks farther into the future and tends to be a lot more accurate. Another characteristic difference between NE and NI is that NI users tend not to like to share their intuitive visions until they are well-formed, until they're quite certain that they're accurate. NE, on the other hand, doesn't really care about the immediate accuracy or even validity of the ideas that it intuits. It's more concerned with just volume and the novelty of the connections. All right, that about covers intuition. Intuition is probably one of the most difficult concepts to understand, particularly if your mind isn't used to using intuition that much. I'm also keeping these definitions as succinct as I possibly can for this introductory video, but I am going to be expanding all of these definitions in future videos. In the next video, we're going to be moving on to the judging functions.